Hello, everyone, and welcome to Patriot Underground. Thank you so much for joining me tonight to discover the truth beneath the surface. So tonight, we're going to get back into Agent Buried Alive with part 9 of the series that I've been doing, which started again on episode 16. But before I do that, I also wanted to make a few comments on a couple of different issues I had alluded to in the previous episode. But before I do that, I just want to say thank you to everyone. As I always do at the beginning of every episode, I like to extend my gratitude to everybody in my audience and just remind everybody that their support is ultimately the engine that's going to help this platform grow. And honestly, when I get positive feedback from the audience, it just fills me up with passion and it motivates me to keep bringing you these reports. So please continue to send me feedback. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know how you react to my podcast, any questions that you have, and please do everything that you can to support the channel as well. Okay, so the first issue I wanted to talk about is the vaccine shedding issue. This is a topic that's been pretty front and central lately. Now, I listened to portions of 107 and Sherry Tenpenny, their discussion breaking this down, and I have to be honest, this one's got me real nervous. Apparently, just to give you the main idea, unvaccinated people can be infected by vaccinated people as whatever garbage they've been injected with works its way out of the body in various different ways. And apparently, these viral pathogens can then be shed onto others who are in close proximity and can cause illness. In particular, they're finding issues with blood clotting that can obviously lead to any number of health complications. Now, I mentioned that I've been dragging my heels on gathering information about this topic because, quite frankly, it scares me and it angers me really to no end. And I'll explain why. Up until this point, we've all been focused on trying to keep ourselves protected from this vaccine by making the personal choice to avoid it. But if others around us are going to infect us anyway, then the vaccine is 100% a bioweapon in the true sense. And that we're all screwed unless we live in the middle of nowhere and interact with no one. I don't know about you, but for me, that's completely unrealistic. It's completely unrealistic to think I can protect myself by isolating. I need to see family and friends. I'm not prepared to abandon them. I'm not prepared to abandon my life. And also, I need to make a living. Everyone I work with, for the most part, has been vaccinated or will be vaccinated. I mean, if this is true, and that means wherever you go in public, you're being subjected to walking bioweapons in the form of vaccinated people. I don't see this scenario as one that doesn't end in disaster if it's true. And I still need to gather more information about this. And again, I appeal to my audience to feel free to educate me if you've learned more information that goes beyond what I've shared tonight. I can only hope this was the cabal plan, and it was thwarted by Trump and the White Hats, of course. Now, perhaps some of these toxic shots have made it out into circulation, which I think is a realistic theory, despite the best effort of the White Hats, which is what doctors are witnessing and why they're so concerned and why they're raising the alarm bell. But we can only pray that this isn't the case with all the shots being used. As I said, that just spells disaster. So we have to pray that they were able to intercept a majority, hopefully a vast majority of these toxic vaccines, and that the military was successful in preventing an even bigger disaster, a genocide, really. That seems to really be our only hope, that this evil weapon was seen ahead of time through the looking glass technology or whatever quantum computer the white hats are using, and that they were able to thwart it, not completely perhaps, but on a massive scale, they were able to thwart what was intended. So we're going to have to see what new information comes out, what new developments unfold. But that's my general assessment of the situation at this point. Kind of ties in with what I had been talking about in terms of Trump's overall strategy of having the military being in control at key choke points to handle the distribution of these vaccines. So if that's true, then it also could be true that, yes, this may have been the intention of the cabal, but it was thwarted. So I have to hope and pray that that's true. The other issue I wanted to touch upon came up in a roundtable discussion between Charlie Ward, Simon Parks, Nino Rodriguez, and Mel K, all of whom I listen to and respect as great sources of information. Of course, I talk about Charlie Ward and Simon Parks very frequently, but Nino Rodriguez is excellent, and Mel K is also excellent. What a wonderful source of information she is, so well researched. Now, they were discussing, amongst other things, a concept that was relatively new to me. So I'm going to share it with you. They were discussing what percentage of people needed to be awake before the military would take overt action. This is an extension of the movie or quote unquote pantomime theory that what we're all witnessing is intended to wake people up. Now, apparently the white hats can gauge public perception. They can gauge how awake the public is using NSA software by monitoring chatter online, and can aggregate the data to arrive at a percentage estimation of where the public mindset is. Now, I have to be honest, when I first was listening to this, I got really cynical at first, initially. Because my initial thought was, oh, great. So now instead of focusing on dates, now they're throwing percentages out there so we can have something new to obsess over. But after I started thinking about it, I started to have a different viewpoint. As often is the case when I'm no longer heated and I can see things a little bit clearer. Now, I've said that I didn't believe that the primary holdup had to do with waking people up. I've said that multiple times. In contrast to what so many other voices out there are saying that are far more prominent than me, but just giving you my perspective. I didn't believe that the holdup had to do primarily with people waking up. That the movie is just filler. And yes, it's intended to wake people up, but not the primary reason for the delay in justice, which I saw as having more to do with the implementation of the quantum financial system and or neutralizing additional threats from the cabal. But I might be wrong based on this information, which, as I said, is new to me. What they were discussing was that the good guys are waiting for public support to take military action. That's nothing new. But the good guys waiting for public support to take action never made sense to me, because how could they know when the time was right? But if they actually can accurately measure public perception, then it definitely is possible that this could be the key to understanding this entire situation in terms of the delay. Maybe what's required is enough people to show their presence or show up on this digital battlefield to turn the tide against all of the ignorance out there. Maybe when we hear the Q team, the White Hats, are a bit frustrated with the timing. I've heard that from Charlie Ward and Simon Parks. This could be what they're referring to, that they had expected more people to be awake by now. And perhaps that's why the dates put out there have come and gone. Maybe the White Hats anticipated the necessary public percentage would have been achieved by these dates, based on whatever data they're using, which would be their green light to move in. And the fact that this hasn't happened frustrates them, as well as all of us, of course. But maybe we, the people, really are in control. Maybe this is good news. Maybe we, the people, really are in control and just don't realize it. Or that our action or passivity will be the deciding factor in how long justice will be delayed. Maybe we need to stop focusing on, quote unquote, grabbing our popcorn. And maybe we need to start taking more action. Now, this is a concept that a lot of people have discussed, of course. But maybe we need to focus on that a little bit more with this new understanding. What can we do to boost that percentage and advance this timeline? If the White Hats are monitoring this and they're looking to see how many people out there have actually woken up, and that's the deciding factor of when they're actually going to take action, that gives us, we the people, an enormous amount of power. So maybe when we hear that ultimately it's going to come down to the people, maybe that's what they're referring to. Maybe the very source of our frustration, the lack of action, is our collective responsibility. Maybe our lack of action collectively is related to theirs, to their lack of action. Could be they're waiting for that percentage to reach a certain level, and that we, the people, are in the driver's seat and don't realize it, or just haven't acknowledged it. So when X22 or other prominent voices are claiming that people are waking up, maybe they're referring to this percentage data that they know about. It's possible. Now, the next question people are likely to have is that, okay, if this is true, what percentage needs to be reached? And this was discussed by the roundtable. And they threw out figures anywhere from what I remember, 55, 60%, all the way up to 80% were thrown out there. And there was some disagreement amongst them. So how many people have to be awake for us to reach a tipping point? That's the question. And I wish I could tell you the answer, but part of me, yes, there's a part of me that wants to speculate, but that's really all it would be, speculation. Now, as I've said, my perception based on my experience is that the percentage is not going up. But I might be wrong, and I'm also only one person with an opinion. Maybe the percentage is rising every day, the more insane things get, as X22 and others, Charlie Ward, are claiming. And that the White Hats are waiting for a magic number before moving in. Maybe there's some sort of a compromise. We've heard a lot about possible disagreement in the military about whether or not they should move in, or whether or not they should take action, or when they should take action. Perhaps this could be a factor of that conversation. Maybe they made a deal, struck a compromise, decided when they reached, who knows, 60%, 70%, that they could safely conclude that the public would be behind them. And if that's the case, we need to quadruple down in our individual efforts to stand up or speak out and be counted. This whole thing might just come down to public sentiment after all. We'll have to see. Okay. So that being said, now I want to switch gears back into Agent Buried Alive. And we're going to pick it up tonight. I believe we were on chapter 9. I didn't write it down here in my notes, but I believe it was chapter 9. You know, it's part 9 of the series. So Casbolt, in this portion of the book, discusses a lot about his remote viewing sessions. And in these remote viewing sessions, and by the way, if you don't know what remote viewing is, I broke all of this down in my previous episodes in this series. Again, it begins with episode 16. But in these remote viewing sessions, handlers are able to view and record what the remote viewer sees on the screen because of what's called RNM digital implants, which are brain chips, and RNM stands for remote neural monitoring. So from his trip seat, Casbolt would also remote view other planets, not just remote view any location on Earth, but he actually remote viewed other planets by projecting his consciousness through a wormhole. And this projecting of his consciousness was facilitated by electroshock while he was in his trip seat. He references the dark atmosphere of a planet, which has most of its landmass underwater, but appeared to have 3 main areas of land with a, quote, large city of light on each one. And that, of course, reminds me of Pleiadian cities that I've heard about. And he describes the remote viewing experience as basically being used as a manned probe. Now, his division within Project Mannequin was known as the Tomorrow People Program. And this, of course, handled remote viewing aspects of Project Mannequin. He describes suffering from random panic attacks that would make him vomit. They were so intense because he was unable to understand what was happening to him. This was during the 90s, before he had really begun his journey to piece his life back together. So doctors were giving him medicines to cope with his anxiety and his panic attacks, and all the medications did, according to Casbolt, was to make things worse. So he then introduces the term mentat, that's M-E-N-T-A-T, which was what he was, essentially a living computer to store highly classified information that can then be shared with other NSA operatives. The files in the mentat are accessed by trauma and electroshock, as I mentioned, which trigger a photographic memory detail of information shown to Casbolt while he was in his trip seat. And this information is known to the NSA as, quote, Mindfiles, and is stored in compartmentalized altars and accessed by their handlers. So Casbolt was trained by the NSA to be completely focused on one task at a time. And he says that his awareness was, quote, like the tip of a knife or a laser beam. In his everyday life, Casbolt also says that he developed an interest in martial arts, in guns, in military hardware, etc., which he believes was programmed into his subconscious to become an expert and to stay an expert in combat tactics. He also mentions that while programming may take only a few years, programming these altars, deprogramming is a lifelong effort. And he still has a very one-track type of mind where it's extremely difficult to focus on more than one task at a time. So he's had to work really, really hard to learn how to live a more balanced life. And he mentions that his experience as a drug runner in what was called Operation Carrier Pigeon, which was essentially black market funds that were used for covert ops led to his own addiction to drugs, which he has since overcome, which is, of course, great news. In a reference to an earlier discussion about walk-ins, I mentioned this in my previous podcast, and the concept of soul swapping, which I also talked about. Casbolt claims that many victims of mind control begin to regain their memories, which have been wiped, after an accident, which is an intersection event. We also defined that in the previous podcast, that results in the walk-in soul taking over. He mentions several individuals this has happened to, including Dan Bursch, whom I referenced previously in a discussion about Project Looking Glass. Casbolt tells the intense story of a man named Duncan O'Finian, who apparently was rear-ended in a car crash and had badly injured his back. This man was a NSA operative. He was just like Casbolt. So he got rear-ended in a car crash and badly injured his back, which necessitated an MRI. And the MRI caused Duncan's brain chip or cranial implant to malfunction and catch on fire inside of his head. Because, as Casbolt says, quote, it had not meshed with the electromagnetic energy of the machine. And he goes on to say he was, quote, laying on the table screaming as hundreds of screens came rushing into his mind's eye. On each screen was a memory that had been erased by the U.S. intelligence community, end quote. So from this event, a walk-in intersectional instant or example took place. So Duncan has this horrible accident, this horrible traumatic experience that served as the intersectional event for the walk-in soul to take over. And Duncan was able to begin to make sense of what happened to him in the aftermath of this event. So Casbolt then ends chapter 8. Oh, yes, it was chapter 8, excuse me, by describing a few other close encounters he's had with extraterrestrials. I'm not going to go through all of them in the interest of time, but I'll tell you in his final encounter, he describes being visited at night by a winged creature that was a benevolent alien, but was an animal-human alien hybrid. And this being told Casbolt that Project Mannequin is trying to create a, quote, godlike race of beings that are modeled after him. These beings have half human and animal DNA. And the other half, presumably, is alien DNA. And finally, after promising to elaborate on this concept later in his book, Casbolt ends the chapter by asking, quote, with the descriptions of Draco in this book, what if people describing angels and devils in the past were these same beings involved in some kind of ancient war with one another? All right, so we're going to leave it there tonight. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Please do anything that you can to support the channel, as I asked previously. If you can donate on Patreon, there's a link in the description. Please do. Please share the videos. Please subscribe to the channel. Leave a like. And I will be back soon with another report, hopefully before my big interview with Gene Decode on Friday. That's Friday, April 30th, this Friday. So hopefully I'll get to do one more podcast before I really switch my focus and on getting as prepared as I possibly can for that interview. So thank you so much for listening once again. I'll be back soon, folks. Thank you again. God bless. Patriot out.